Thank you all for coming, and I want to thank Maggie and the members of the Heritage Week Committee for asking me to do this. And I want to start off by telling you, I'm going to talk a little bit about the characteristics of Lasallian higher education, 4 of them, really 5, but the 5th one's going to be kind of running as a thread through the talk, and try to illustrate what I think has been LaSalle's experience with each of these over the years, and then a little bit looking forward, because the last 2 really, I think, are, while they're very much historical characteristics of Lasallian higher ed, they really are issues that are big challenges for us, I think, going forward in the future. Challenges and opportunities that we can meet, but they are definitely very strong challenges. How Lasallian can a university really be? That's the title I gave to Maggie, and as I thought about that title, I actually realized that it implies something I don't believe. It implies that it's hard to be Lasallian, that it's not possible. Depends upon where you read the accent. How Lasallian can a university really be? You know, George Bernard Shaw said, Catholic university is a contradiction in terms. Is a Lasallian university a contradiction in terms? I don't want to imply that, so I rephrased the title just a little bit to say, how Lasallian can a university really be? Because I want to make the point that we can be Lasallian. I think our experience here at LaSalle University proves that. I don't think there's any question about it, though I think some of the brothers in the audience, and maybe some of the folks who have been familiar with the brothers over a long time or who have been involved in Lasallian education experiences, would understand that the history of the Christian Brothers was not initially a history in higher education. And as things evolved over a period of time, higher ed came on the scene, and now, right at this moment in time, I think it's safe to say, though not popular to say it outside of a higher ed audience, that the most vibrant place in the Institute of the Brothers of the Christian Schools and their associates is our colleges and universities around the world. We have roughly 40, and they're clustered here, 6 of us in the United States, 6 institutions. We have institutions throughout Mexico, a very goodly number up in the teens. We have institutions in South America. The Philippines is very strong, with institutions that the brothers have founded and that have affiliated with our network. And then an institution in France and an institution in Kenya, and burgeoning efforts at higher education elsewhere in the world. So it's a very vibrant sector in the brothers' international scene, something that St. LaSalle could never have imagined. This is the thing I said about the history with the word Lasallian. Now, the brothers here, again, will understand that, you know, when we entered, you didn't use that word. It wasn't necessary. All you had to say, it's a brothers' school. And that denoted a bunch of things. It was taught by guys, they were teaching guys, and you can take it from there. And there might have been women on the faculty, on lay faculty, but it was a man's world. Some of you may still think it's a man's world, but you can save that for the questions. Although I find it hard to believe that you could actually say that about LaSalle. We have 60% women students enrolled in the undergrad population. But anyway, here's the little history. I started teaching in 1965, all Christian brothers. I was a high school teacher. I was happy as a clam at high tide. That's what I thought I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I could never have guessed what was coming next. In the late 70s to the early 90s, slowly, very slowly, there was an emergence of the use of the word Lasallian, and it was kind of soft. It was an attempt to look more inclusively at what was going on around the brothers. In the 60s, we had an international chapter, and we had one in 1976, I think it was. And in the 60s, it was a chapter of change and renewal. In the 70s, the big issue was, should we or should we not ordain brothers to be priests? That was dismissed as a possibility. But from the late 70s on, this word begins to appear because the recognition is that we've got all these people that are our colleagues. And while the brothers didn't have a language for it, they sensed, I believe, something profound about these relationships. And that's what's continued to emerge. And mostly from 1993 onward, Lasallian has been a word used to describe partners and associates with a growing understanding on the part of the brothers and a growing understanding on the part of people who work in brothers' institutions, who work with the brothers, that their role is more intimate than just, and this is an expression that used to be used when I taught in Pittsburgh, the lay faculty. You know, and there were certain people who used that dismissively, I have to admit. I hope I didn't. But so things really changed in my time as a brother. Now, if you've been a part of this for a long period of time, you know there's a companion change going on. The brothers' numbers are getting smaller. And you could argue, or you could think, or you could wonder if what drew this new concept out was numbers. Like we can't do this all by ourselves, we need help. Inevitably, there's a little of that, but if you step back from this and look at us, all of us, but certainly the brothers in the worldwide Catholic Church, things changed at Vatican II in terms of where the central identity of Christian life was. It was really, it moved from the clergy world to the lay world. And we've been living through a period where that has been fought over, back and forth, back and forth. And up until the election of Pope Francis, it kind of looked like the clerical forces were winning out again. And this is a brother talking. Brothers are a little bit hard on the clergy. So I think things are changing again, and I think what's happening is the deeper stuff that went on in Vatican II is asserting itself. And I like to think the brothers were riding that wave. But I don't want to say there was no pragmatism involved. We can count too, so, you know. But that's why I also put that phrasing, a substantial understanding of and by the partners. It's not just numbers. Little story to illustrate this. When I came to LaSalle in 1984, is Brother Emery in the audience? Okay. Brother Emery organized, this is complimentary, so I'm not going to say something that's not complimentary. I want the brothers to remember that this is complimentary. He organized a series of colloquies, I guess you'd call them, at lunchtime, and we would get together and talk about what it means to be a Catholic university. And they went on for several years, and they did have some endpoints. They got to some actions. But I remember saying one time to Brother Daniel Burke, who at the time was, had retired as president, was teaching English, and was director of the Art Museum, and I said, well, you know, all we're doing is talking about this stuff. And he said, well, you know, you can always tell a Catholic university. And I said, how? He said, because the people at a Catholic university are always talking about what it means to be a Catholic university. And he said they kind of have to do that. And I think that's true about us as Lasallians. We've had a journey that I've charted, that it's my personal journey, but at the same time the institution has been on its own journey with the same adoption of this thought about Lasallians being partners in a bigger enterprise than just what the brothers do. And if we don't, you know, talking about it may not be the right metaphor because, you know, everybody goes to committees and committees go on and sometimes they go nowhere. Brothers don't even like homilies that go more than 5 minutes. I mean, so talking is like, you gotta get your point in quick. But the concept that I want to get across is the involvement of people sharing their stories. And it's one of the things that I think as another illustration of this that LaSalle has done very well is the partner seminars that were developed and which we have run through one cycle of at least. And they required an awful large input of person power and hours. But they are a real resource for us and can be repeated. And that concept of involving people in the discussion about what it means to be part of LaSalle and Lasallian life can go on here very fruitfully. And can, I mean, I think in one sense, without putting more work on the Office of Mission, the one thing I'm going to say about this is in this presentation, it may appear to the students that are here that I haven't got you involved in this, that I'm talking mainly to faculty and staff. But the conversation among students is also very important and can parallel what's going on among the faculty and staff and intersect with it. And we have students who have been involved in Lasallian conversations both nationally and internationally. If some of you went to the Explorer Cafe, I'm going to shift to the next slide for just a second. It's a really neat slide. I did not do this slide. I copied this from Joel Garver and Susan Dixon and Kathy Sikansky's slideshow. And so now that's a footnote, in case anybody wants to know. I did not plagiarize this. It's a different listing of them. And it came from one of the websites of the region, the North American region of the Brothers. The one that I'm using comes from a talk that was given here in this room in 1993 by Brother Luke Salle of Manhattan College. And the occasion of it was the installation of Joe Burke as president in that year. And Luke used these 4 characteristics. They're going to sound familiar to you. 5 characteristics. You have to start with the story of St. LaSalle. That's what JBDLS is throughout this. Emphasis on good teaching and the person of the teacher. Teaching is not done in isolation. And then that kind of morphs as our language morphs first into a language of community, then into a language of, or first into community, then into association. And we might even talk about sisterhood and brotherhood, although that's not particularly current here. It is in other Lasallian institutions. And it might not fit an academic community in the United States too well, but it works in other cultures. Commitment to the service of the poor and commitment to the religious development of the students. And there's a reason I use that phrase, and that's the phrase that Brother Luke used in 1993. Okay, so those are the characteristics I want to talk about. The point I make up at the top, I came late to this story. This is another thing that I think it's probably amazing to people who encounter the brothers. I don't know what you think our point of access to St. LaSalle's story was. But all of the U.S. brothers, I think, we all got the best view of Lasallian things as after we entered the brothers. And I'm going to embarrass him a little bit. Brother Miguel was sort of like the point of the spear in the Institute. Brother Miguel Campos back there, that there was a tremendous renaissance in Lasallian studies that went on in the 60s and the 70s and has blossomed and enriched everybody's experience. I joined in 1965 and we didn't have an inspiring biography of St. LaSalle to read. I don't, Brother Luke Salle has written one for an American audience called The Work Is Yours, and I hesitate to use the word inspiring on it because I once gave it as a gift to the board members at Christian Brothers University, and I was real proud of myself as a wonderful Christmas present, low budget, pertinent to the mission. I was so proud of myself, and I get a phone call. I'm home with my mother, and I get a call from the board chairman. I said, "Joe, where are you?" He said, "Oh, I'm in Pensacola. I'm on the beach. I'm on the porch reading that book. You told me it was interesting." I said, "I told you it was informative." I probably said interesting too, because I thought it was. My point being that this is all, if Brother Luke's insight is right, and I think Kathy, Susan, and Joel were onto the same point about finding yourself in the Lasallian story, that's very important for all of us. It didn't necessarily happen just when I got the brothers' habit. I had to learn a lot more of that story, and I think it's safe to say that as the members of this community have been learning this, the brothers have been learning it too, and relearning what we learned originally. It's kind of like a second naivete. You go back and relearn what you had learned once before. So those are the characteristics. I'm going to comment on them briefly, and then do some application and wrap up. What are we going to say? This value, that teaching is important and the person of the teacher is important. Now, I want to start off by saying that if I were giving grades to LaSalle University on all these characteristics, I'd give us an A+ on this one. We work pretty hard across the board to identify people that can succeed as teachers, who want to teach. You can always make a misjudgment in hiring. That's possible. And then we have a pretty strong faculty culture of evaluation that has been in place really since I got here in '84 as a teacher. And I credit people like Brother Emery and Brother Patrick and Brother Daniel and their colleagues for nurturing that. And I think we're very, very astute about how we influence each other as peers, faculty and staff peers, and lead each other into this kind of thing. So I think we do pretty well at this. Nobody's perfect, so maybe A+ is too high, but you get where I'm going. Okay, there's two dimensions to this, what the teacher knows, and here I'm using the word teacher to embrace all staff members, because you know, when you come into student affairs work, you have to have a certain degree of competence. You can't just go out on the street and say, please come in here and work here. So it's the people who have to have preparation. What the teacher knows and who the teacher is as a person is important. This is so critical to our success, and yet it is hard to say in a way that is distinctive. And I'm pointing to something here that those of you who have watched those ads about the business school, how many have seen those? Okay, only the dean did not raise his hand. All right. I think, and I don't know if you like the word or not, I am completely mesmerized by the success of the use of the word mentor in that ad. Success as judged by what I'm hearing as reactions from alumni, what we heard in the focus groups that tested that out, and even in the insight of the ad group that came up with it. Because we really want something more than a knowledge dispenser. We know that, and we don't want best buds. It could end up that teachers and students are friends for life. But that's not really what makes the thing tick. There's some other relationship in there that is intimate, that is helpful to leading the student to another place. And the word mentor works really well for our undergraduate students and our graduate students. Some of the images of intimacy work only well for undergraduate students because grad students come in with a particularly high professional expectation and they're already involved in other work. So sometimes the language we use to talk about our undergraduate students doesn't work too well. And what doesn't work at all, for me, is the language that St. Lasalle uses to talk about students. I mean, I love the meditations on the time of retreat, but they don't really do for me what my thoughts are about our students. And that's almost heresy among the brothers, But, I mean, I have to do a lot of mental transpositions to get to thinking of 18 to 22-year-olds about whom I read in the security reports. The evolution of this has taken us to an important place, doing Lasallian research. So we've still got teaching. Lasallians value teaching wherever you go. Doesn't matter what culture you're in. But there is a growing movement about Lasallian research, and that is a direct result of the fact that in the Institute of the Brothers, in our 80 countries around the world, and in the 40 institutions that we have, there are colleagues like you doing research, just as we expect our faculty to do research. We had a faculty achievement seminar event this week, and we gave an award for excellence in research. So it's an important piece of things, and the Lasallian research has had its own little history. It started off very much in history of the origins, the original documentation that St. Lasalle left behind, which is tremendously interesting and in some places downright inspiring, just on its own terms. But you can see the direction Lasallian research is going if you were, as I do, I receive this stuff all the time from the International Association of Lasallian Universities. There will be a second research symposium being held in Minnesota in I think it's late September, maybe late October. And they're trying to focus on research which picks up really on both the, I would say, the practical orientation of Lasallian things and the promotion of social justice and a better society aspect of it. And the topics tend to be environmental justice topics, water quality and water reclamation projects, things that are very engineering driven. And I keep thinking how it would be possible for our curriculum to plug into this growing movement, because it's obviously being driven by schools that have certain curricular expertise. And I do see some points of intersection for our nursing faculty, and I see some for the sciences, although our science faculty has not typically, some of the environmental studies things have gone in the direction of these research projects, but there are points of intersection. I don't know where it's going to work out for the liberal arts faculty in terms of this particular characteristic. So, and this leads us with a question about one of the responsibilities if I'm so confident that we do the right thing at the point of selection, we have to keep doing the right things to retain these teachers, to recognize them, to support them, and to make available to them the capacity to get inside the Lasallian story in the way that works for them. We don't expect everybody to become a brother. We don't expect everybody to become a Catholic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think everybody kind of understands that that's the ethos here. We do want you to become Lasallian. Okay. Teaching in community. For the brothers, for going back to St. LaSalle, teaching was not done in isolation, and that makes an important historical point. When St. LaSalle came along, the model was one teacher, one school, all the students, everything done one-to-one. Dr. Marbach would come up with his lesson, he would recite it to me, then he'd go sit down, and whether there was anything happening to make him progress after that, who knows? Then Brother John would come up. And then Maggie would come up, Dr. McGinnis, and it was one-to-one-to-one. And chaos could reign in the room, not those three exemplary people, but, you know, chaos could be reigning. And whatever the recitation was, that was education. St. LaSalle changed all that, but he also changed the fact that teachers have to communicate with each other. And I got a tremendous example of this week in the other award that is given at the Faculty Achievements event. There's an award for research, which this year went to Fred Van Fletteren in philosophy, who is internationally acclaimed for his work on Augustine, and the award on service went to Lynn Texter. And each of the awardees have to give a little talk, and Lynn talked about how she was brought into this community and influenced by the community of her colleagues. Now, she focused mainly on her colleagues in communication, but not only. And she talked about how the community helped make her a Lasallian. She didn't use those words in that talk, but I think it was fair to say that that's what she was talking about. And I bet you all of us who have been here a while can point to that development. And so I think that works here too. Now, this is something that I don't think we can take for granted. And I'll tell you another little anecdote. I had a conversation with a faculty member last week who was commenting in a mildly critical form about the decision to put the business school up on the point there of Worcester and Chew, or yeah, Worcester and Chew, or Olney, whatever you want to call it. And the point that this faculty member was making to me was, it's tough enough as we're spread out to stay connected. And this applies, I mean, when you think where the nursing faculty is and the advancement offices, they're up there on West Campus, so you get the point. That to stay connected, to stay a community, you kind of have to see and know each other. And I point that out, you know, I pressed to put the business school up there. I thought it was the best choice for us for a number of reasons, recognizing that's a risk. And recognizing that we don't always have the structures in place, the parties and the kinds of times to come together to overcome that. But we do need to keep that in full view. And I can tell you another little story back from my days at Christian Brothers University. You'd have to know the center quad of Christian Brothers University very well to understand that the engineering building and the science building were separated from each other at the end point by about 20 feet, or 20 yards. And I was in a conversation one day with a person in the engineering school whose office was the last office on the first floor, and a scientist who was in the last office on the first floor on the building that formed this L. They had both been at CBU for 20 years, and they didn't know each other. So being close by is not all it's cracked up to be. You do have to work at that too. We have to work at that too. And I'm not saying I've done the best job in inspiring that. It's been in my mind, but you know, it's a point that I wouldn't give myself the highest grades on. On on this formation of community, I want to end on another point. This community is not just about faculty and staff. And I think we have had, in my time as president, a very powerful demonstration of how students saw the community at work, maybe even better than the staff did. And it goes back to 2004. I don't know if those of you who are here remember the blue wristband campaign. Anybody remember that? Yeah, We Are LaSalle. That campaign was a student-driven campaign to kind of demonstrate our pride when we were getting battered in the press after the rather unfortunate behavior of the couple members of the basketball team at the time. They were arrested and charged with sexual assault. It was a tumultuous summer. Months went on. We were in the news constantly. It was really painful. I mean, I talked to the St. Joe's president the other day. He's complaining about being on the front page one day. I said, yo, that's nothing. And I developed a lifelong friend in Stephen A. Smith. Woo! So that wristband, though, I still have one on my bureau, and it testifies to me that the community that we're in is not just teachers with teachers, it's everybody together. And there are times when one constituent group gets it better than others, which isn't to say that the faculty and staff didn't get it, but the students thought nothing of developing an explicit symbol of our connectedness. And a lot of us wore them for a long time. Commitment to the service of the poor. This is a tricky one for today. We're all sitting here and we know how much colleges cost, and we know all of the discussions. Let me just kind of put a little bracket around this. We know why this is difficult. You pick up the paper. Too much student debt. Costs are rising. What's the return on investment? It's a question that people ask our tour guides, they ask the admissions office. The President of the United States loves to put out litmus tests and charts that we have to put, answer and put on the website. So this is bombarding us. And we do know that we are not teaching, in large part, the students here are not what the society calls poor. And higher education that the brothers have done has followed the track of immigrant Catholics, and they have ended up teaching mainly students who are in the middle class. This is a little bit of a socioeconomic analysis, not trying to talk about anybody individual. That's who we have been teaching. But at the same time, the middle class is also experiencing the same stresses, and their financial position is not as strong as it was when I started here in 1984. So that I think it's safer to say for us that when you look at this question and this key value, whom are we educating? We are educating students by and large in a middle class that is under tremendous pressure and for whom access to higher education is getting harder and harder. The corollary to this, though, is that LaSalle has a very high number of students who receive Pell Grants, and Pell Grants are, on the federal calculus, the most needy of students. Still not necessarily what St. LaSalle might have meant when he said the poor. We have 40% of our freshman class are Pell Grant recipients. That's a high number. It may be too high for us going forward because they have such extreme financial need. But it is a question that stresses us, and I think our response, we didn't intentionally go to that number of Pell Grant students. I have to say that the number went from the low 20s to 40% over 5 years. I think it was just a reflection of the enrollment patterns that we were in. But it's a challenge. And that's why I want to raise something that is a little bit different. I think it's very critical for us going forward that we think about the curriculum that we have and the educational experience of our students, that we are thinking of them as being educated towards being committed to the poor and social justice, just as much as we think of them as, reaching for access. We have to, and I'm not saying we don't do this, but I think that should be uppermost in our minds as an educational community as we go forward into the future, so that what we do can really fulfill the mission that we're committed to. And it means something different in everybody's discipline. It's way too complicated for this format. I want to go down to that question under the second bullet. Where does this hit the road for me? And you can imagine what's in that Daily Mail that I'm referring to. When I first came here in 1999, I would receive some letters about financial reversals that families are experiencing and asking for special help from LaSalle. I see Ray Ritchie here, who was Vice President for Enrollment at the time, and Ray dealt with many of those with me. And I think, and I don't know if George is here, but George Walter, but he's getting the same kind of letters sent over to him today, but incrementally more. And when I first came here in 1999, the story would often be, my dad is sick, and sometimes it'd be written by the other parent or the parent who's ill. I'm sick, I'm out of work. But the implication was, I will recover and I will go back to work. I have read more stories about both my parents lost their jobs. I've had my parents lost their jobs and our house is being, repossessed or closed on. And it's, you can't respond to all these things. And I'm sure, because I remember when I was teaching full time, that those of you who are in the audience who deal with students on a daily basis and who don't get to ride in like I do and be the president who knows everybody's name and really doesn't, you hear these stories close up. So you know what our students are dealing with. And that's where this is a daily story. I'd also say I had an encounter yesterday in the Mingle at the charter dinner. A student came up to me. I had taught this student in an honors class. He'd just come back from a service trip, a study trip, travel study trip to India. And when the people who do these kinds of things, who take students into situations of poverty, they say it's life-altering. And this student, without reading the script from any article or any course syllabus, said, I can't even begin to tell you, I can't get my head around what I saw. This is a smart student, so it's not a matter of intellectual understanding. And I think we have a responsibility in that direction that we're doing well at. We should do as much more as we can, recognizing we run into the financial challenges there too. This is a tough one for financial reasons. Committed to the religious development of students. When St. LaSalle founded the Brothers, he called them the Institute of the Brothers of the Christian Schools. Christian was coextensive with Catholic. So it's really not an out point for us to say, oh, he really founded Christian schools. No, he founded Catholic schools. But from the earliest days of the Brothers, St. LaSalle had an instinct of tolerance that shows up in the way the Brothers schools in southern France, where the Huguenot movement was strong, were open to non-Catholic students. Huguenots were French Calvinists. And I think that tradition has stayed with the Brothers. And I think the other thing I'd say, and I thought of developing the whole talk on this, I think we all struggle trying to describe what it means to be a Lasallian to people. I think the reason we struggle is so much of this is wrapped up in a style of being together, a style of teaching, a style of relating to students. And it runs the danger, if you sit back and you're at the end of the day saying, yeah, it's all about style, and you're having a nice brandy, and as I often do, and you say there's no substance to it. I think the style and the substance for Brothers are so meshed, for Lasallians are so tightly meshed together, that the style carries substance with it. And so when you get into this kind of the atmosphere here, our atmosphere of tolerance at its highest levels is not the tolerance that is so common today in the relativist environment of the give and take of daily life. Oh, whatever. I don't want to just lay that on students. I think we all fall into that. But there's plenty of research that says that young people have a high degree of relativism in their outlook on life, that everything, every viewpoint is relatively acceptable in its own terms. And I would also want to say that I would want a Lasallian institution to be accepting of people in a kind of broad way, without abandoning our core commitments. And how you pull that off it's what we do when we're at our best. When I went to Memphis in 1994, that institution was still proud of a description that was given to it many, many years before when it was called a Temple of Tolerance. Think about Memphis, hotbed of segregation. And even before that became a burning issue in American society, not that there wasn't segregation, in Memphis there is one of the largest community of Jewish persons in the United States. The brothers were the first school runners in Memphis to open their doors to Jewish students. So that in the culture of that place, in its very bones, was this tolerance. You run the risk of being called not Catholic enough. And I know that, people who work close to me know I bristle when I hear that, because I don't want that ever to be a perception in the conservative Catholic world, but it's hard to keep everything in the same spots. Okay, I want us to have a strong and vibrant program that introduces students into Catholicism, but I think we have the capacity in our institution to engage students' religious development across religious traditions that in a way we've not exploited yet. And I'll just have to leave it at that. But I think that's really what Brother Luke was after in 1993 when he said the characteristic of Lasallian higher education is to engage students at just this level. Where are we now? Well, I told you at the beginning, I agree with Dan Burke. It's very critical for LaSalle, and I have no reason to think this isn't going to happen. I mean, this is not contingent on the president exactly. The president has to be supportive of it, but we have an office of mission. We have a lot of people who have had Lasallian education, and we have more active Christian brothers than any place in the world here on this campus. So we have plenty of resources to continue the conversation. I think we must. The service culture at LaSalle is an enormous strength, and it is to be explored, I think, yet to be explored in terms of the service learning, the kind of learning that will produce students that have the kind of commitments to the poor and the marginal that I was referring to. Our religious diversity is a strength. It's a little confusing trying to figure out how to manage it at the moment, but it's a strength going forward because the world's not going to get more homogeneous. And lastly, on the curricular level, our instinct to blend the practical and theoretical really, at its heart, responds to all the challenges that are on the front pages of the paper. That doesn't mean that we have marketed it well enough or that even we've exploited it well enough. So, that's kind of my journey. I think we are very well positioned, but we do have financial challenges. We do have resource issues. In some ways, St. Joe's is taking a beating for defending a certain level of financial strength. I'm happy they're getting the press. I mean, I'm sympathetic to Father Gillespie when he calls and asks for sympathy. I freely give it, but I'm quite happy that they're getting the attention. But every school of our type and their type has those challenges. Can't avoid them.